morning, councillors, and welcome to the Housing and Community Safety Committee for the 29th of January 2020. Could I ask, oh here he's coming back now. Could I ask, do we have any apologies this morning?
Convener, we have apologies from Councillor Shires, who's been substituted by Councillor McCall, and apologies from Councillor Drysdale, who's substituted by Councillor Lane.
Thank you. If I may just first of all mention that the audiovisual system is working this morning, so we have no plausible denial if anybody says anything. There are to be no fire alarms this morning, so if the fire alarm does go off, it's abandoned ship. And if I can also mention telephones and mobile devices should be on silent, rigged for silent running. Before we proceed further, the Executive Director would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Convener, for the opportunity to say a few words before the discussion on the papers committee this morning. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that almost all of the reports today are in the Head of Housing's name, and this is to reflect work we are undertaking across the service to reflect recognition of where and who is leading on the activity being reported on. I'm very keen to ensure that committee reports reflect this approach while Keith and I still retain final approval and sign off to ensure consistency. Reports which are service-wide, such as the Business Management and Improvement Plan and the Annual Performance Report, and today the rent setting paper will continue to be in my name. And this is the approach that we're also taking at E&I Committee as well. And I hope, that clarifies that little change. And I also hope that you would bear with me and, just a little bit of indulgence. I've said before at this committee that I'm very proud of our housing team and believe that while we always don't get things right all of the time, it's not for the want of them trying. I also believe that they are one of the best, if not the best, in Scotland, but it's always good to get evidence of that. So yesterday, so it's hot off the press, the Scottish Government published their biannual update on homelessness statistics, which links to our rapid rehousing update later in the committee. Perth and Kinross are highlighted as having the biggest reduction in presentations in homelessness from April to September last year, and the biggest reduction in households in temporary accommodation. We're also fourth best for length of stay in temporary accommodation, which is really good given that we generally accommodate the most vulnerable who tend to stay longer until they are ready to move on. I'm sure the committee will want to join me in publicly saying a huge well done to Claire, our housing service managers, Elaine, June and Michelle and their teams for their hard work, commitment and dedication to putting our service users at the very heart of all that they do. Thank you.
I'm sure we'd all concur with that, Barbara. Next item on the agenda, minutes. Are we happy for me to... Sorry, I've skipped one there. Declarations of interest. Anyone has a declaration of interest? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I have a declaration of interest in that I'm a member of the Community Justice Partnership.
Thank you. Any others?
I should probably declare the same interest.
Thank you. And are we happy for me to approve the minutes of the last meeting? We all agreed? Thank you. We would... At this point, normally we approve the removal of the private papers forward so that we can hear those. I'm advised by the police and fire that there are no private papers this morning, private messages, so we will go straight into the normal reports. And I understand the Vice Convener would take both police and fire reports and is also going to handle papers 5 and 6 as we go along. So hand over to the Vice Convener.
Thank you. So we'll go on to item 4.1, which is the Scottish Fire and Rescue Interim Activity Report, and I'd like to ask Gordon and Billy to come up. Over to you, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. Members, here we have a verbal update on the festive period. That is a period from the 1st of December to the 5th of January. Before I pass you over to Billy McClintock to give you the details, the report itself overall has a positive nature to it. There were a small number of notable incidents. However, in addition to these notable incidents, there's also a significant amount of community safety activities as part of our prevention agenda going forward. These were undertaken both by ourselves and in a multi-agency approach. So again, the partnership continues to try and resolve these incidents before they happen. So to give you the details on the overall period, I'll pass you over to Billy McClintock.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Just please note that although this is a festive report from the 1st of December to the 5th of January, and the statistics we're going to give you are taken off at that point, so when we deliver the Q3 report, those numbers may change slightly. So this is just taken off between the period of the 1st of December and the 5th of January. I'll just take you through that. Over that period, we had a total of 168 incidents that we mobilised to, which is an 18% reduction on last year. And if we go through every highlight, which I'll talk about each subject, we had a reduction every one of those areas at this point. So I'll talk about deliberate fires. We had 6 deliberate fires across that festive period, which is a significant decrease from last year with 18 deliberate fires. 2 of those were in Pomerian Flats, which we'll come on to later on, and 4 of those were outdoor fires, 1 in a recycling bin, 2 refuge and 1 external shed. Accidental fires, we had 29, which again is a significant reduction from last year with 49. Of those 29 fires, 11 of them were accidental dwelling fires, which always seems to be around the 50% mark. 5 were vehicle fires, 4 were chimney fires, and 4 were refuse fires. Fire casualties, over the festive period, we had 1 fire casualty, which was a result of one of the fires at Pomerian Flats. Non-domestic fires, we had 3 over the festive period, which again is another significant reduction from last year with 13. Those fires were, 1 was in a care home, 1 was in a shop, and 1 was in a school, all with minor damage, only through heat and smoke damage. Special service incidents, this festive period we attended 29 special service incidents, and that, again, that's a reduction from last year with 55. Of those 29 incidents, the majority were RTCs with 12. We also attended 3 water rescue incidents in Perth, and the rest were all around gaining access. We had 7 gaining access medical type support incidents, and the other ones were around animal rescue and lift rescues. False alarms, this festive period we had 101 false alarms. Last year was 187, so a fair reduction there as well. Of that, the majority of them were in commercial premises, 43, with 33 in dwellings and 12 in schools. That kind of covers most of the incidents. I just wanted to talk about some notable incidents, of which I'm sure you're aware was the 2 incidents we had in Pomerian Flats, 1 late December, 1 early January. Obviously, from a service point of view and partnership point of view, we've done a lot of work since then to remedy some of the issues there. We've been done home safety visits in the majority of premises there. We've been doing reassurance visits. We've been making sure we do our high-rise inspections to make sure the building is where it should be. And if later on, if we take any questions, I'm sure Claire would like to just comment on some of the actions that we've done there since as well. Other notable incidents were some water rescues we attended, one of which was resulted in a fatality. So as I'm sure you're well aware, the water rescue incidents are very resource intensive. And the other one was a number of RTCs that we attended, 12 over the period, which I'm sure can be quite tragic at times. Some of the notable community safety activities we did, this year we did a partnership with Police Scotland and Trading Standards in St John's Shopping Centre, where we covered quite a number of areas around community safety, home safety, heat and fuel poverty, poverty awareness and fraud, etc. That was a very well attended event in St John's Shopping Centre. We've also done some more work over this festive period with Princess Trust, giving some awareness training and water awareness, CPR training, etc. to that group of kids that are going through the Princess Trust. And our long-standing partnership with Anthony Nolan saw us visiting Perth High School over the festive period with 94 students signing up for the Anthony Nolan Trust. I don't really have anything else to say on the report unless you have any questions around things that I've mentioned or anything over the festive period.
Do you have any questions? Councillor McKeown?
Thank you, Vice Convener. First, I'd like to raise that we have not seen any actual hard copy papers relating to your report at all. Your verbal report just now is the only communications we've had on the fire or police things. So thank you very much for that. And the question I have, is probably one related to Mr. McClintock that you hinted at, was to describe the team approach that we've taken with the housing and with yourselves towards the two fires in the Palmerian flats.
Yeah, maybe I said at the start, it was agreed at this committee that it would be a verbal report over the festive period for us and the police. As far as Palmerian goes, obviously we as a fire service do quarterly inspections on all high-rise premises anyway, and we always put a report back to Perth and Kinross Council about those premises and if there's any actions required for some of the inspections we do, and that's about the safety of the walkways, etc., the lifts, all the doors, conditions of doors, etc., etc. But post-incident with Palmerian, we obviously done quite a lot of home safety visits. We done reassurance visits. We obviously attended a public meeting along with partners, particularly Perth and Cross Council and the police. And we've been out there since, and I think it would probably be appropriate for Claire to respond to the action plan that we put in place, because most of that was headed up by the Housing Department.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the joint partnership arrangements, I think, on an ongoing basis, we work very closely with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service just in terms of all our fire safety and fire prevention matters in any case. In response to an incident like this, we obviously work very closely both during the incident on site, whereby we'll have attendance obviously from Fire and Rescue Service, but also council officers from within the housing service to respond immediately to any issues or questions or concerns that residents might have. And then immediately after the incident on the 5th of January, I think it was a couple of days after that, we had an on-site visit with members of our locality housing teams, representatives from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and indeed representatives from our housing improvements team. And at that point we did a full on-site inspection, a joint inspection I would stress, and identified immediate action that needed to take to reinstate the building and also any improvement actions. As a follow-on from that, as you will be aware, there was another incident shortly after that on the 9th of January. We then had a residents' meeting on the 13th of January, to which all residents from the flats were invited along. And again, that was a joint partnership meeting with ourselves, Scottish Fire and Rescue, and the community police officer also attended. I think that was a very productive, positive meeting. I think we had a very open conversation with residents. We certainly, assured them that we were there to listen and taking very seriously any concerns that they may have. The action plan that was drawn up took into account, I think, all collective views, not just from the professionals involved, but absolutely in terms of any of the residents' concerns. What I would stress is that at the outset, given the ongoing quarterly inspections that are undertaken by the fire service, all actions were in place in terms of Palmerian. Any additional actions that we've been taken have been either to reinstate the building or have been added improvement actions that we've undertaken. So since the fires, we have installed sprinklers in both of the bin rooms. We've done a wee bit of extra work in terms of the fire access gates, extra panels, and we've upgraded the locks there. We've completely cleared the cellars where the first fire took place on the 22nd of December. We've enhanced our CCTV within the area. We already had CCTV at Palmerian, but we've enhanced that. That alongside enhanced security, we've introduced enhanced security on site and indeed enhanced our caretaking service. So the CCTV enhancements, the security on site and the additional drop-ins by the caretaker are really just to provide that additional reassurance to residents. The fires, we understand, were started by as a result of a lit cigarette, and I think it's just to have that extra vigilance on site and in the area. We have got a further meeting that's due to take place on Monday of next week, and again, that will be a partnership arrangement. We'll go back, have further discussions with the residents. Don't know if we've got anything.
really just offer Councillor McHugh some reassurance as well. This report covers from the 1st of December to the 5th of January. Our Q3 report will cover from the 1st of October to the 31st of December. So all this information will be captured there and presented in writing. And from the 1st of January to the 5th of January will be included in our Q4 report from the 1st of January to the 31st of March. And again, that will all be formalised through. So it'll all be duplicated as well. So you get sight of all this information formally as well.
Can I just add as well, I attended that meeting in the role as Vice Convener, and the response from the residents were very positive to the really detailed accounts that were given both by Housing and the Fire Service. And generally at the end of the meeting they were very satisfied, and as Claire says, there's going to be a follow-up meeting which I'll attend as well. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Convener. That was a very impressive list of improvements, Billy, all round, and must be great savings to the communities and to the fire service itself. One really notable one was the false alarms, 187 down to 101. That's a tremendous drop. Can you account for that? And is there an attributable cost to false alarms that the fire service must bear? There must be some sort of cost. Do you have a figure on that?
What we're doing is, one of my key priorities this year has been to reduce especially the unwanted fire alarm signals. We have an action plan in place to manage these down, and this action plan is working with partners, working with the owners of building to reduce the number of call-outs but not increase the risk. It's very easy for us to reduce the number of turnouts, but what we're looking to do throughout Scotland is to manage that in a mechanism where we do not increase any risk to the owners and occupiers of the building. So it's an ongoing process. What we're trying to, this is very fantastic numbers, but what we're really trying to do is over a 3-year period reduce by about 15%. So it's a gradual increase is what we're trying to achieve. So this activity has been, these numbers have been obviously fantastic. But I'll pass you on, do you have the details on some of the activity we're doing?
Every premise that we visit for a fire alarm system operating, we will engage with the owner-occupier to really sit down and find out why that's happening, particularly if we get multiple calls. So we'll sit down with them and try and work on an action plan to resolve the number of particularly ones that are false alarms. I mean, obviously, if they're going to ones that are because of something's happened, we obviously manage that from a fire safety audit point of view and take into account what's happened, why, and allow those occupiers and owners to put in actions to reduce those. We've been working really hard. Our fire appliances that attend these incidents are the first protocol for that. If it is a continual number of incidents, it comes up to ourselves, and we've got fire safety officers who will go out and visit these premises to try and reduce those as best we can. We are starting to see some success with that. I'd also say that the number of places that are getting more modern fire alarms is coming in as well. So those are more smarter type systems, so that starts to reduce the numbers of calls. I would put a bit of note of caution on the numbers we've put forward today, because our system hasn't actually caught up. There's still a number of incidents that are incomplete, so those details haven't come through the system yet, so are not included here. I think that at the moment it's sitting around 6%. So when we present our Q3 report, those numbers may vary slightly, particularly because it's covering it's 3 months. So we do a significant amount of work with owner-occupiers, and we'll also get support from our fire safety officers to try and reduce those numbers.
You're seriously working at trying to reduce false alarms. That's the way you do it. Good.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I think that the statistics that we've been given by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service team are very positive, and we're grateful for that. I think if it's possible to get a copy circulated after the meeting, Gordon, then that would be appreciated, notwithstanding that we'll get the fuller information in due course. I also wanted to thank and put my appreciation on record for the work of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, our housing service, and the police in response to the incidents at Palmarium, and also to the staff and management at the Queen's Hotel next door for providing respite facilities to people when they were evacuated from their homes. It's great to see the community pulling together at times like that. I was slightly concerned by the comments made that these were considered deliberate fires. I had kind of up until this point assumed that they were dangerous if accidentally caused fires, and maybe it's a kind of blurred border between, you know, what's considered deliberate in terms of negligence and carelessness. But I wonder what has happened in response to, you know, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service considering this to be a deliberate fire with regard to engagement with tenants over cigarette litter and the consequences of sort of repeating that sort of behaviour.
From the investigations on the time, our operational crews will investigate all fires as they would in any other element. What we've also put in place is if there were to be any future fires, we will escalate any fire investigation requirement by bringing in a dedicated team if required to do that further investigation. But all our officers will work to get a most likely cause, a probable outcome, a probable cause of the fire. And speaking to a number of the managers, some of them, that the probable cause was a cigarette. Whether that was put in place or how it was put in place, we don't have that defined detail. With things like the local authority putting in CCTV and other support networks, that will allow us to evidence that further. But things like the sprinklers that they've put in place will significantly reduce the likelihood of these incidents reoccurring anyway.
Councillor Lang.
Thanks, Vice Convener. It's been 2.5 years since we used to be in old community safety and see the same gentleman, and it's good to see that there's improvements. I've got 2 questions, if you don't mind, Vice Convener. The first one was, and you maybe gave the figure, Billy, but I didn't pick it up. I think it was 101 false alarms. How many of those were malicious false alarms, i.e. somebody, and how many were faulty equipment, which was what you seem to be talking about? Because I can understand how there'll always be faults with alarms and you have to turn out them, and we try and get that down, but the worst ones are the malicious ones where people are calling you out when there's not an issue. And the second question is really probably to Claire, is that it's heartening to hear how the 2 fires in Pomerian managed to get quick and incisive action, but I would like to know that's in one specific area. What's happened there been looked at the rest of our housing stock, and have these same actions been taken? Have we got sprinkler systems in all our other housing stock? Are we looking to do that? Have we learned the lesson from the problems there and rolled it out over the rest of the housing stock's the question.
Just to answer your question about malicious or good intent, generally we break it down to 4 areas: equipment, false alarms, good intent, and UFAS type incidents. Commercial properties account for 55% of that 101. 6 were malicious calls, and we had 15 calls which were good intent.
Okay, we have a service-wide fire risk action plan that covers obviously all of our stock, and we need to take different measures depending on the type of accommodation. And that does cover everything from fire risk assessments, ensuring that they're in place and any actions are prioritised and dealt with. Tenancy management, so that very much is round and about us being out on the patch, regular inspections of frontline housing officers and frontline staff of the full estate, ensuring that, you know, residents are being supported in terms of any actions that it can take. Partnership working is another key area across the full services we've just described. Obviously, repairs and maintenance in terms of our capital programme, and responding to any repairs that might arise, and ensuring that we fully comply or exceed any legislation in that respect. And communications and tenant awareness is also absolutely key. And certainly we have key messages that go out to our tenants in terms of what they can do, what we will do as a landlord to support them, but also any actions that they can take in terms of, you know, keeping common areas clear and free of rubbish. In terms of sprinkler systems, Yes, we're responding here on this occasion. As you probably are aware, we took a decision probably a couple of years ago to install sprinkler systems within all of our new builds. We will install sprinkler systems where risk areas are identified, such as we've just described, but also perhaps on an individual property basis if an individual is deemed to be at risk and we feel that there's a need to install a sprinkler system. We have only yesterday been looking at our new multi-storey strategy in terms of improvement works to multi-storeys and had quite a detailed discussion at our HMT about the issue of sprinkler systems in key spots within the multi-storeys along with our operational management. So absolutely that will be something that we will be discussing with residents going forward.
Councillor Power.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. Billy, I was very interested to hear you talk about pupils signing up as potential donors for the Anthony Nolan Trust. And I just wondered, is that going to be something that's going to be included other schools, or is that just a sort of very small example of it? Because I can't help thinking that's a huge boost to the Anthony Nolan Register.
What we have, we've got a national approach to the Anthony Nolan Trust. Many years ago, we had a senior officer from the West area required a transplant or was ill, sorry, with leukemia, and he continues to drive this agenda forward. What we've done is we've mapped a full spectrum across the whole of Scotland. So we have a number of local teams. We've got two in the Tayside, one based in Perth and Kinross and one covering Dundee and Angus. That team will go around a number of schools, will engage with schools, and throughout the whole of Scotland we are engaging with schools just at a capacity level. It's a fairly positive process. We're able to get the pupils involved in the engagement and the organisational processes. We initially have that touch base to inform them and educate them on the Anthony Nolan and what they can do and what they're committing to, and then we'll come back in 2 to 3 weeks time and then take people onto the register, and it's a simple process. But between those 2 dates, we identify champions. Those champions then work to organise the donation day, work to organise the people and actually champion the event within each school. It's a very positive model and it's very successful, and it's been recognised a number of times with both Scottish and UK-wide awards. So it's a very positive element, and we are generating a large number of people onto the Anthony Nolan Register.
Thanks very much. That does sound hugely positive, and I'm really impressed by that initiative. Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis.
It seems to be common practice now that people don't smoke in their own homes, they smoke outside. Now in blocks of flats, I mean, we heard about the risks of a fire. Is there a smoking area in flats? Has that been considered?
No, there isn't. I mean, I think people do smoke sort of, as you say, outdoors. But yeah, that probably is something in terms of our discussions with the operational strategy for multi-stories going forward that we could discuss with residents in terms of the consultation process. So we'll take that on board.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. As there's no more questions, thanks very much, Gordon and Billy, for an excellent report. And I'd like to invite Ian Scott up.
Thank you, Vice. Good morning, everybody. As colleagues from Fire and Rescue have already stated, this is a verbal update for the period, sort of 5 weeks over Christmas and into the new year. Traditionally, it's always been a very challenging time for ourselves, but also a very enjoyable one to work. It's a slight anomaly for P&K in that the other Tayside areas don't provide an additional report, but I'm happy to do that and maybe give you some of the information that's pretty much routine business for ourselves as far as the period under review went. it was a successful period, and a lot of that is to do with the prevention work, visits, etc., which we carry out. But there is a quantity of calls that always come our way, and just to try and give you some idea of how we try to reduce them is we have a festive policing plan which covers the whole area, and it looks at key locations, perhaps some busy areas that maybe don't normally feature, and we can maybe look at some of the hotels that host party nights, which seem to be increasingly popular and attract visitors from across the length and breadth of Scotland to enjoy the hospitality. So we link in with these premises to make sure that, yes, they are supported, they understand the licensing responsibilities, they know how to manage any incidents that arise and when to call ourselves or other emergency services. We look at our staffing to ensure that we've got hopefully the correct number of staff on at the correct times. It can be pushed later into some of the evenings for ourselves as alcohol takes effect. It can be on days of the week that are not traditionally the busiest for us, just depending when Christmas and New Year fall, etc. And we put out a lot of preventative messages regarding both property and personal safety in the run-up, and hopefully these take effect. I think that trying to get the good news story, traditionally over Christmas, unfortunately, we've seen some real tragedies, some real horrific violence. That's not been the case this year. Whether that's as a result of all the preventative messages, sort of changing in culture, or a little bit of good fortune, or a combination of all of those, I'm not just too sure. But as far as things have gone, it's seen as a pretty safe and prosperous time for ourselves and colleagues. To give you some idea of the sort of range of calls and the type of calls we got over 3,500 reports to the police over the 5-week period, which is slightly higher than sort of normal times of the year, but as one would expect over the Christmas and New Year period. So there's a lot of volume calls coming in. How that equates to crime, we've got about 950 crimes recorded on the back of those incidents. So yeah, probably 1 in 4 results in a crime being recorded, and that can range from road traffic offences, acquisitive crime, antisocial behaviour, and indeed violence. So a significant amount of work, that's for sure. But probably, unfortunately, we sort of plan for what are acceptable numbers, and that's kind of where we'd expect to be across the range of crime types. We also have to carry on that usual day business, and we have to support the functions of the Crown in relation to the service delivery of citations and that sort of stuff. So there's over 260 citations served. A little bit of a anomaly again in this day and age, but we still have to serve a hard copy on behalf of the Procurator Fiscal. So again, that day business has to continue. I spoke about some of the preventative work we do, and under Police Scotland, a huge change from the old Tayside police days is us interacting with licensees and visits to public houses. We carried out over 300 of those in the 5-week period, and the vast majority of those are early sort of knock on the door, who's working tonight, have you got any problems with your clientele, anything you want to report to us. So there's that strong engagement, and we feel that allows, one, supports licensees and the staff to be on the front foot so things don't escalate, that they have that relationship with police officers, that it's not seen as a failure if there's an issue, and they have the confidence to report matters to ourselves. So good engagement there. Number of warrants executed, so arrest warrants primarily, 46 warrants were executed over the period. We'll then be coming to some of those people who have found the festive period a difficult one. We had 19 reports of missing people. Some of those maybe only for an hour or two, just needing some time out. Some of them are more significant, and can run to a week's inquiry. So each missing person is risk assessed to see if it's a case of, they're needing some time out, or there's immediate threat to their life, or believed a threat to their life or others, and resourced accordingly. But again, if you think of it, 19 over the 5-week period, we're probably sitting with some sort of missing person inquiry ongoing every day of the week. And that is just the nature of the support we put to communities. We also had a general election for those that missed it, which again has a slight impact on policing, and we've got the best part of 90 polling stations to visit, as well as the counts, etc. So you can see that the volume of calls and incidents that are there. Road policing colleagues in particular do a lot of breath tests. You know, we have the festive drink drive campaign, and we're always keen to reduce the number of positive breath tests. Had over 1,000, in fact 1,100 breath tests were carried out over the period. You will get the full facts and figure in the report on the 25th of March, but the failure rate's thought to be in the region of 5%, which probably equates to previous years. So that's we'd rather it was low. We're doing a lot of stop checks. Unfortunately, we're still finding people that are prepared to either drink and drive or indeed take drugs. Probably leads me on to some of the other vulnerabilities. When police officers deal with members of the public, if there's a perceived vulnerability, and that could be a missing person is perhaps particularly young, or increasingly maybe elderly with dementia, or there's a person at a point of crisis, we'll submit a report, a vulnerable persons report. Over the period, we've submitted over 500 of those. So again, there might be no crimes there at all, but there may be a mental health assessment, there may be support from friends, social work, or indeed the NHS. But again, it's a constant area of support that we need to put into our communities. So it is extensive in the time and effort that takes to keep people safe. Some of the most challenging inquiries we've probably had over the festive period, we've had two specific serious RTCs, road traffic collisions. The first one on the 31st of December on the A977 near to the Windy Ridge junction, in which a male, 77-year-old male, tragically is deceased as a result, potentially as a result of that accident. Inquiries are still going on to understand whether it was the accident itself that caused his death, or whether it was a medical matter. So again, road policing colleagues heavily involved in that. And the second one, which has probably been the most intensive investigation over the 5-week period, was in the early hours of the 5th of January on the M90 just north of Junction 4, the Kelty Junction, initially responded to by colleagues from Fife, in that there was a police vehicle not far behind the accident. So a one-vehicle accident turned out just as it came into the Tayside area, the back of 2 in the morning, and a male with significant serious injuries within the vehicle. It quickly became apparent that other persons had made off from that vehicle and had not been traced. So the inquiry involved road policing colleagues, other emergency services, CID inquiries, and indeed local police inquiries as well. Tragically, the male that had sustained the injuries succumbed to those injuries and died. His identity was unknown. He was believed to be a foreign national. There was an identifying mark by means of a tattoo, but certainly on British systems, he was unknown. We had 2 other people, as I'd said, that had made off or had left the area, and it was unknown whether they had any significant injuries. The vehicle had sustained very bad damage to it. So there was that issue whether we had somebody in need of help in the area. So there was search teams, helicopters, dogs, police search advisors all involved to try and find those. A lot of inquiry, and we managed to trace one of those involved in Dover, looking to leave the country, and he was arrested and brought back up here for inquiries. And subsequently, a third person has been identified, again a foreign national, who has returned to Europe. So inquiries are ongoing there to bring him back for further inquiries as well. The deceased was eventually identified as a foreign national with help through international liaison, and his family informed of the circumstances, but a difficult inquiry when no eyewitnesses and unsure as to exactly what happened and indeed who was involved. So it maybe gives you a flavour of some of the festive activity that Police Scotland's been carried out on your behalf.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question really is about the breath tests. Were they purely for alcohol, or was there a mix of alcohol and drugs? And what was the mix of positive tests?
So the whole regime will be reported on the sort of third quarter stats. It is a mixture of alcohol. Still is by far the greatest proportion of failed breath tests, but increasingly as technology improves, we're getting and we have reported on it before, the types of drugs that can affect people's driving, and we're starting, as the technology catches up with the with that crime type, we're able to bring those people towards court, and I'm happy to provide more information in the full written report.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'm actually, if you'll indulge me, mine is actually a question. I'm going to, because you're here, ask this question. It actually comes up in paper 6, which is the Community Justice Partnership paper that we've got coming. But there is some information in there that says that there has been an increase in the amount of warnings given by police, but a reduction in the amount of fixed penalty notices. I was wondering if this was actually something to do with a change in policy within the police, or something that the two might be related in any way. So I'm taking the opportunity to ask you the question while you're there, and I'll probably quiz officers when it comes to the paper, but I was just wondering if you knew of anything like that.
Sure, there's no certainly any change in policy on my part to provide less fixed penalties and more warnings. What we try to do is empower the officers to make those choices. So we probably all make wrong decisions at some point, and if that is a one-off, and officers believe that with the benefit of a little bit of time and hindsight, people will be perhaps ashamed or embarrassed at the behaviour, then a warning will be the best course of action. If it's a case of it's repeat or it's affected other people within the community, probably prefer a fixed penalty. Some of the road traffic offences that we'll see in the third quarter full report have seen a increase in the number of reports to the fiscal prosecutions as opposed to warning. We've probably sat for the last 18 months, 2 years, trying to educate and encourage individuals to drive responsibly. I think there's pushback to some degree from elected members and communities to say, no, this is a problem in our communities. We're finding in our locality plans that antisocial driving is a concern. So that has been a direction, probably contrary to maybe some of the FPNs that have been issued. So it can come and go, but to answer your question, no specific policy from my part other than to empower officers on the ground to make the best decision as they see fit.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I wondered whether investigation of the hate crime activity and postering in the city centre in December last year had yielded any positive lines of inquiry, or anybody had been detected for that.
So thanks very much for the question, Councillor. Yes, we were made aware of items getting posted on flyers. While they could be construed as certainly not something we encourage or condone within Perth and Kinross, not a hate crime, I think is what we would say, and it not being investigated as a hate crime, but being investigated as a community concern. Community officers have carried out a lot of inquiries round about looking at CCTV. At this stage, no, the person who's posted them has not been identified, and we worked with the team to remove those posters as they were put up. I think particularly when we look at this week in the Holocaust Memorial, what has been going on, we try to build a strong and cohesive society. But there are people that have different views, and we follow particularly strict guidelines as to what is a hate crime and what is not. And in this case, the advice we've been given is that no, that does not constitute a hate crime, so it's investigated as a community concern rather than a crime.
Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It's just a general question regarding CCTV. We're having a debate in my ward at the moment about CCTV coming into Blairgowrie, and it seems to have split opinion as to whether it's of any use or is it an invasion of privacy. So I wonder if your view on that as a police view, and also the other factor that came up is that by positioning it in one particular place, it merely drives that crime somewhere else.
Thank you for convener. I suppose this is quite well rehearsed conversation. As we go back probably the best part of 20 years for CCTV being brought into the sort of wider public domain. I think there can be concerns, and I think it's right that police and others are challenged as to the need or requirement for CCTV. I would say that we get very few complaints locally. It is seen as supportive. The work that's been done to augment and enhance the CCTV coverage for Perth and Kinross is looking at vulnerability as well as criminality. So if we go back 20 years, there was a lot more shoplifting and antisocial behaviour in the town centre, and there was the concern that this would merely push it perhaps into the schemes of some of the rural communities. There may be minimal evidence for that, but the majority of people that are committing acquisitive crime or violent crimes, it's often spontaneous, and there's not a lot of pre-planning goes into it. And those that do, and the CCTV work at Gleneagles robbery might be an example of that. They kind of try to take other measures, whether it's concealing their identity, etc. It's a balancing act. I think a lot of these things are a balancing act. We don't want it to be intrusive, but we want people to feel safe and be able to use the community. It is a great asset for police when we're carrying out inquiries. Obviously, again, we mentioned technology, how it can prove beneficial, but it also brings that wider context of what is acceptable to modern society. And I know colleagues in other parts of the country are looking at facial recognition, and that technology will be available, and it's something that will need to be discussed it's here and other places to see whether it's a route that we look to go down as a collective. I don't think it should be brought in solely by the police. I think it should be by discussion. I personally think we've got quite a good balancing act. I think the having a mix of key locations that always have or regularly have the CCTV fixed, and the opportunity when something sporadic happens in a location that we can bring either the mobile CCTV camera or the temporary CCTV cameras in, gives us some response. It is only a camera though. It's the background on the work that needs to go into that. There's no point in just having a camera for the sake of it. And the final point I perhaps made is again, the technology has probably overtaken us in that the number of not just business premises, but individuals who will have their own CCTV for the home, either as part of an integrated house safety device set to alarm, or increasingly we're seeing doorbells that are linked to an app that can be viewed on the phone. So it might be a moot point come 10 years' time, because the majority of folk will probably have some form of unsupervised CCTV system for their own home.
Thank you very much. If there's no more questions, thank you very much. And thanks to yourself and the fire. And if you want to go, that's okay. Thanks very much. We'll move on to paper 5, Community Planning Partnership Update. We have Lee Haxton here. Don't know whether he wants to say anything to paper, or we'll go straight into questions. Do we have any questions for Mr. Haxton? Oh, Councillor McKeown.
Thank you. I just had to get myself logged back in again, having gone to screensaver. I noticed in the report that the community planning team are going to look at the evaluation of SIF projects, and that the local action partnerships are actually being made aware of the actual outcomes from the projects funded by the SIF fund. So the question that comes to my mind is why the local action partnerships weren't just doing all this in the first place.
Mr. Haxton?
I'm sorry, Councillor, could you repeat the last part of that question? I didn't quite catch it.
So my simple question is, why were the local action partnerships not just given the SIF funding to implement, rather than us inventing a whole new system that we've had to try and monitor and adjust? And
I'm sorry to give a very short answer, but that was the decision reached by committee.
Thank you, Vice Convener. A quick question. It's good to see the breakdown here of community investment by percentage of funds according to the priority that they were trying to address, like the social isolation, connectivity, etc. That's very good analysis. I wondered if similar analysis is available that can tell us about where the funding went relative to the SMID index of that area. I know it wouldn't be immensely easy to do, but I wonder if there's any level of analysis that can tell us about where this funding is going according to measures of deprivation, is my question.
I would imagine that's fairly difficult, but Mr. Haxton might be able to elaborate on that.
My initial response is it's technically possible. I think the new SIMD data, which I think is the reason for your question, obviously just came out yesterday. I would need to go and check with staff to see if that's possible, but it's not something we've looked at yet.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Lane?
I was just wondering if the be any evaluating of the SIF projects to see how well they've delivered moving forward on the idea behind the whole SIF funding, reducing inequalities, and if we're going to drill down in a year's time to see if ones that were money that was given out last year is still, you know, it's not just disappeared into ether, it's continuing to provide positive results.
Yeah, I do know the groups have to provide feedback for the projects they put forward, but maybe Mr. Haxton could elaborate on that.
Yeah, each successful applicant is contacted again 6 months after their funding award and asked for an update with their project, or if they've completed the project, for details of the impact that it's had. We'll then do the same again after 12 months, and we would expect that the project would be complete within 12 months. Obviously, we'll take that on a case-by-case basis if there's any reasonable reason for any delay. We're currently looking at those projects which received funding in the 2018-19 round, and one of my staff members is collating a report which will be shared across all local action partnerships and ward panels, summarising the impact that those projects have made. Trying to link the specific SIF projects to any statistical change in levels of deprivation, I think would be really, really difficult to make that case, but we'll give as much information as we can.
Councillor Waters?
Just carrying on that theme, regarding where projects have been given money and maybe some of the feedback shown that they're not quite using it yet, what kind of actions are taken then? And is there any cases of people who have been given money, certainly in the 18-19, where they haven't used any of it yet, or they're maybe waiting on external funding from elsewhere to make it up? And what would be the plans in dealing with that?
We did take advice when we were putting together the application form from our legal colleagues, so there is a declaration which each of the applicants signs at the end, which says that they accept that this is effectively a contract if they're awarded money, and if they don't spend it as they said that they would, there would be recourse to claim the money back. Happily, we've not had to do that. There have been a couple of, well, probably a handful of projects who have asked for an extension or given good reason why they would like to change some of the tasks that they would like to do with their project. When we have received a request like that, we've gone through the ward panels again to say, we've had this request to change the project, are you content to do so? And so far, all of those requests have been approved, but I believe that all of the projects who got money in the first round have at least made some headway. Some are taking longer than others, though.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lane?
You just indulge with one more. For clarity, that was all the money that was given to council, was 2 years worth by council, a decision at council. So unless we have a decision in the upcoming budget, there is no funding set aside for the SIF fund at the moment, is there?
That's correct. If there's no more questions, any comments? Councillor Barrett.
Just very briefly, I think it was useful to see the pie chart diagram and the different areas of inequalities that have been targeted by the SIF monies, which is useful. And again, I would caution members against overly prescriptive or onerous analysis of the Community Investment Fund monies. This is money that we and resource that we have decentralised and devolved to communities and to local action partnerships, and we should allow them to get on without being on their backs about it.
Thank you. Councillor McCall.
Thank you very much. Yes, I thought the pie chart was excellent. I think it's it's important that we get this information back. It's also really interesting that over 60% really went to sort of three main categories: in social isolation, community empowerment and capacity, and quality of life, which is interesting. I'm glad to see that there was a lot, the highest amount, 23%, going into social isolation and loneliness, that with more and more social isolation being at the cause of many social issues. I think it's really interesting that right across the board was the one where the majority of funding went to. So I think this is an excellent report. I'm glad we've got this information, and I couldn't agree more with Councillor Barrett's comments that this is devolved information down to the communities for them to do what they believe is best, and we really should see it in that way. So thank you very much indeed for the information. Yeah, I bet you're glad I was substituting today. Anyway, can I just go to the report? Thank you very much for the report. I think it's excellent. Page 23 of the report says, makes reference to West Bank providing opportunities for community groups. I was just wondering if that has started or when it's going to start, and what's the proposed sort of take-up, or what is the actual take-up, depending on the answer to the first question.
I can comment that West Bank at the moment is very much a work in progress. It's a multi-partnership venture which goes far beyond obviously just the unpaid work teams. For example, the nature trail I think is nearing completion now, if it's not quite there yet. So I don't have the details with me at the moment about the actual take-up or the numbers involved, but my understanding is that it does aim to be quite a significant venture, including which will include different groups and different numbers of people from all sorts of different sectors. It really has a proper community feel to it, and will involve a whole lot of different people from different parts of our community. But I can certainly try and find out a little bit more about the timescales involved for you, and give you that information at a later date.
As I'm substituting, but that would be very interesting, I think, to find out, and also to see just what the take-up is when it actually starts to get involved, and maybe have a bit more feedback. So with your indulgence, convener and vice convener, it would be interesting if that could go out to all councillors rather than just to the committee.
Yes, certainly make sure that happens.
Thank you.
Yep.
As well, you may be aware or not, as the case may be, that there's also a regular newsletter that's sort of about the activities of West Bank. Hopefully that is circulated to all elected members, sort of in that, so we can start to look at the information from this to go into that newsletter as well.
Can I also just add one thing as well? I know that some elected members have taken up the opportunity of visiting West Bank and having a tour of the site. If you haven't been able to do that yet, then I know my colleagues are more than happy to accommodate people to come and do the have a tour and hear a lot more about the work that's going on there. And I'm quite happy to facilitate that. If anyone would like to get in touch with me, I can arrange that with colleagues.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'm looking at the bottom of page 48 here, the section for percentage of people released from a custodial sentence who have either registered for a GP, have suitable accommodation, or have had a benefits check. It's noted there that data is currently unavailable to measure those indicators. My feeling is that those are pretty stock and standard ways of measuring the success of a person as they come out of a custodial sentence. I think I recall seeing these figures in 2017 or 2018. I just wondered if officers could give us some detail as to why that data is unavailable and whether or not it's a priority to get that data, because it feels like it's a very good numeric indicator of success of rehabilitating people. Thank you.
Yeah, I know most of this came from the NHS partners, but maybe Charlie can answer that, or if not, get some information from the NHS partners.
Yeah, I mean, Community Justice Scotland as a whole and the different partnerships are working very hard with SPS colleagues, Scottish Prison Service colleagues, to try and obtain that data. It's not proving easy. The figures aren't readily available, which we weren't aware when the partnerships were formed. We have made some progress, I know, in, for example, the number of people who are registered with a GP when they leave a custodial sentence, but I would agree that those figures are absolutely crucial that we have them, and at a partnership level and at a national level, I know we're continuing to push to try and get that data readily available. It isn't there yet, but I would be hopeful that sometime in the very near future we will have made significant progress in trying to start to get those numbers available to us.
Follow up, if I may. What was it that stopped that data being available? I understand it used to be available. Was there a different body that was doing this work and that body had access previously?
The data in relation to these four things, the partnership, we haven't had that specific type of data made available to us. And even at a national level, that data hasn't appeared to Community Justice Scotland. So it may have been some form of iteration of the data in the past had appeared, but we haven't had anything presented to us to date. So as I say, we'll continue to try and get that data going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Councillor Barrett.
On page 35 of the pack, page 7 of the report, Alice's experience, or Alice's story, gives a fairly shocking indictment of the Procurator Fiscal's Service. I wondered, is the Fiscal's Procurator Service one of the statutory partners within the Community Justice Partnership?
They are a statutory partner, but they don't attend, or they haven't attended. As far as since I've been the chair, I don't know if Charlie's got anything else to add to that.
It's been an issue across the different partnerships. However, the community justice coordinators have taken it on themselves to try and resolve the problem. So in a couple of weeks' time, a number of coordinators are meeting with local Crown Office representatives with the idea that if they won't come to the partnership, we'll come to them. I would hope that this will see the beginning of regular meetings with coordinators and Crown Office officials. And what we'll do is take the information from those meetings and feed them back into the partnerships. In an ideal scenario, then we would be able to do everything within the partnership, but I do appreciate that it isn't always possible, particularly because some of our partners obviously have a significant number of commitments and in fact are required to attend 30 different partnership meetings around the country. So I hope that by going out to the Crown Office officials, this will provide some sort of solution to the problem.
I would just like to add as well, the Chief Executive has also taken this up with the Procurator Fiscal's Office, and I attended a Community Justice Chairs meeting in Glasgow, this was also brought up. So it's been brought up at all levels of both senior officers within the councils, with the chairs of the Community Justice Partnership and the coordinators as well. So they are well aware of the issue.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I'm very pleased to see that it's been pursued at officer level, senior officer level, and a political level too. Notwithstanding that, I do think that the description and the experience of Alice is unacceptable, and in the absence of the Fiscals Procurator Service from the Community Justice Partnership, has to be resolved, even if that requires shaming them to the table, as opposed to going out of our way to involve them. I think there's some excellent examples of good practice within this report. I think things like the work that's being done at West Bank, and I had the pleasure of attending a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary there and showing her what was going on and the expansion plans, which were very positive. I think the aspects of the report, which include the Forensic Examination Centre in Dundee for women victims of rape and sexual abuse, is a really positive step forward. I do have a concern that in terms of gendered violence or violence against women, that we're not operating at a sufficient scale. It would be interesting to know what numbers of Perth and Kinross resident males are taking part in things like the Caledonian system as a proportion of male sexual offenders or perpetrators of violence against women in our area, and are we looking to step up the Caledonian system to meet a greater number of perpetrators in our area?
Do I answer that?
The Caledonian system was implemented in Perth and Kinross in April of last year. So we're now starting to see clients coming through the system. It's still early days. My understanding is that we're about to operate in conjunction with Dundee, our first group work programme. We don't have definite numbers yet. The Caledonian database has just come online, so very shortly we'll be able to populate that and start to run some proper analysis on the numbers and indeed the outcomes from the Caledonian system. It's also worth noting as well that Criminal Justice Social Work in Perth and Kinross operate the Respect programme as well, which is suitable for perpetrators who don't meet the criteria to take part in the Caledonian programme. So between the two programmes, I would hope that what's offered is a very comprehensive set of programmes to deal with some of the issues that you raised there. But I would be hopeful that in the next report, in fact the next Community Justice Annual Report, I'll be able to provide data concerning Caledonian across Perth and Kinross.
Thank you. In terms of the first comment there about making it noted, Charlie has sent round to all the partners request for the annual report, which has just come out in draft format from Community Justice Scotland, asking for feedback. So we'll note that and put that as part of our feedback back to Community Justice Scotland. Councillor Pover.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. On page 66 of the report, under the heading of challenges, the report makes reference to the temporary suspension of the Through Care Support Service, and I'm just wondering how temporary is that suspension likely to be?
As far as we're aware at the moment, it's very temporary in terms of very long term, although there possibly are other measures being put in place. Charlie can elaborate on the measures that have been put in place.
Yes, I mean, Scottish Prison Service colleagues continue to insist that the suspension is temporary, but there's no timescale been given to elaborate on that information. In the meantime, across the partnership and indeed nationally, a number of bodies are trying to take on the work that the Through Care Support Officers had previously been undertaking. And in fact, in Perth and Kinross, there'll shortly be a meeting of the Through Care Network, which has been established by the Governor of Perth Prison. And that includes representatives from Dundee, Angus, Perth and Kinross and Fife local authorities, and also a number of other partners, with the idea of trying to formulate some kind of proper strategic and operational response to the withdrawal of the TSOs.
That's great, thank you very much. And could I just ask a supplementary question? When you're talking about, is this a result of pressure and resources, or are there also sort of staff numbers being reduced? I just wondered if you could just sort of comment on that.
My understanding, and obviously it's a Scottish Prison Service issue, but the information that I've been given, and indeed is reasonably common knowledge across the partnerships, is that it is indeed a result of the increased numbers of prisoners across the estate, and also because of staffing issues as well. So I believe it's a combination of the two things.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Barrett, another question.
Thanks very much for letting me in yet again, Vice Convener. It was on that same section of the report, and the fact that we're not measuring whether discharged prisoners are registered with a GP, and don't seem to think that that's a worthwhile thing to do, which surprised me, as well as whether or not they had suitable accommodation, and that seemed to be in contradiction to the work that we're doing in terms of our prison discharge protocol. And I wondered, are we just not matching up data that we have, or is there a particular gap? Well, there would appear to be a particular gap with regard to GP registration, but I wondered whether we're just not marrying up with regard to the prison discharge protocol, whether people have suitable accommodation to go to. And the benefits check.
Yeah, as you'll recall, a number of years ago when we introduced the Tayside prisoner pathways protocols, we introduced housing surgeries into the prison. We continue to attend the prison on a regular basis to ensure that prisoners have accommodation upon release, and we will have that data in terms of locally here within Perth and Kinross, how many prisoners have come through the housing options or indeed the homeless route, and secured accommodation, suitable accommodation. So we will have that information and we can make that available.
Charlie, have you anything to add?
Yeah, just also, I mean, what we're looking for from Scottish Prison Service is that information from them too, rather than relying on our own colleagues to provide that information, and that's the difficulty we've got. We can't get that information from Scottish Prison Service because it appears that on a number of occasions they simply don't capture that information when someone goes in. Now, I know there's a lot of work underway to try and provide a solution to that, but it has proved incredibly difficult. It's not for the want of partnerships trying to get that information and also deeming that to be incredibly important. It's vitally important. For people coming out of prison, particularly from serving a short-term prison sentence, to have that information and indeed to have those supports in place has been crucial. But that information, as I say, from SPS has been lacking to date, but it's something that we continue to try and work with our colleagues in the hope that they can provide that to us.
I'm not trying to belabor this, but if we've got the information readily to hand through the housing and homelessness services, do we really need to be pursuing the SPS who are finding it difficult to collate that information?
From a local point of view, just from the housing situation, no, but I'm talking more in general, because what we're trying to do across the partnerships is to gain a picture across the whole of Scotland of the situation, and we're looking for the SPS to provide that national picture, particularly because when we're looking at, obviously, places like Perth Prison, they deal with prisoners from all across the country, not just people who are from Perth and Kinross. So we're trying to get a national picture as well as our own local information. So we can get bits and pieces locally, but again, we still don't have the full picture. For example, things like GP registration, we don't have that data to hand at the moment, but I'm hopeful that we will do at some point in the future.
Any more questions? Any comments on the paper? Councillor McEwen.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for a very good paper which does describe a good system that's improving and taking things forward for people in our community who offend. This obviously comes from a national strategy looking at a holistic approach to make positive changes to people's lives using an evidence-based system. Something I understand being a healthcare professional, because that's how healthcare works as well. Looking at ensuring that short-term prison sentences aren't as common as they used to be because they just cause more problems than they should. I want to highlight the unpaid work team. I'm sure the convener is my ward colleague. We've both seen the work done at Kirkmichael and the Village Hall, which has transformed what was a tired building that a small community were finding difficult to use, and turned it into something that will be able to be used for years and years to come if we can get the road outside fixed as well. There was national outcome stuff, item 5, 6 and 7, all showing advances and improvements for offenders and in areas that are really important in health and housing and safety and positive relationships and education. You know, getting these things right will stop people reoffending, stop people coming back into the system. And it's good to see that these things are moving forward. Priority areas of focus on victims, that goes on to what Councillor Barrett was pointing out about Alice's story and how victims are treated, family relationships, and again, taking the evidence that we have from our women and our work with young people and trying to improve our work with male offenders as well. I think it's a very good positive taking forward and trying to make the system better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's no comments. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. And again, briefly, on page 55, page 27 of the report, there's reference to the delivery of interventions targeted at problem drug and alcohol use. It looks like somebody's made a burek of supports for people with those sorts of problems. I hope that we're now on a more even course with that into the future. I was wondering, what role the alcohol and drug partnership.
Now,
I can still speculate as to what the role of the alcohol and drug partnership is in taking that forward, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. If there's no more comments, are we happy to note the report? Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to the convener to carry on.
Thank you, Chris, for that. Before we go on to paper 7, if I may, I had held back this morning, we were expecting 2. Could I just welcome our tenant representative, Christina Stewart? Yeah, so we were expecting to have 2 representatives today, but I'm afraid, Christine, you're on your own, which is why I held back from welcoming, but there we are. So we move on now to paper 7, which is the details of the housing revenue account. There was a members' briefing held a week before Monday, 20th of January, and I know many elected members here on the committee were there, but I will ask Claire if she could reintroduce the paper, please.
This report sets out the proposed housing revenue account budget for 5 years from 2020-21 to 24-25. It recommends increases to rents for houses and other HRA property service charges and an appropriate level of reserves. The proposed budget for the next 5 years of the capital investment programme, totalling £69.4 million, is also detailed. The HRA 30-year business plan has been updated to reflect and confirm the affordability of the proposals. The housing revenue account meets all day-to-day expenditure relating to the housing stock, as well as investment through our capital programme. And there are a number of factors that can influence the rent-setting proposals, both in the short term and indeed in the longer term. Engaging with our tenants is of key importance to ensure that they all have the opportunity to have a say in the decision-making process. The process starts in April with a questionnaire to all tenants. This is then followed by a conference in the summer and a further one in October, with all tenants and prospective tenants receiving a rent options voting paper to register their preference for the rent levels for the coming year. The information that we provide to tenants not only tells them the impact on service delivery, it also highlights the affordability of each of the options. The outcome from this year's affordability assessment demonstrated that again Perth and Kinross Council rents were on average 4 to 5% lower than neighbouring local authorities and 21 to 22% lower than local housing associations. A total of 1,251 tenants, that's 16% of our tenants, and an 18% increase from last year, responded to the voting survey, with 56% of them voting for a 3.5% increase. The rent increase will allow the housing revenue account to continue with the same high level of service that's provided to our tenants, with additional investment in a personalised tenant budget, a dedicated housing occupational therapist, and an additional £4 million for purchasing additional buybacks, £1 million for property refurbishment, and the overall capital investment, as I mentioned, £69.4 million over the 5-year period, which includes £29.5 million for new build housing. To summarise, the recommended 3.5% increase is in line with the views of our tenants. This will ensure that our rent levels remain affordable to our tenants and sit as the 6th lowest in Scotland, so continuing to compare favourably at a national level. The measures outlined will support continued and sustained improvement in the delivery of housing services, and more specifically, they will meet tenants' priorities in relation to increasing our housing stock, continuing to invest in their homes, investing in our repairs and maintenance service, supporting tenancy sustainment, and supporting older tenants and people with disabilities to remain in their own homes.
Do we have any questions for officers? Councillor McCall.
To say, I bet you're glad I'm here. I actually want to go to page 94, which is the feedback from the tenants' rent survey. It does seem that all of the above is one of the most popular answers that is coming back. Just to ask the question, is that something that we can actually achieve, since it's very much detailed that actually, do you know what, we'd like pretty much everything done if that's possible. So can I have a sort of reality side of that?
Yeah, this is the initial high-level survey that we send out to tenants, and then what we do at the following conferences and engagement events and the further drill down is drill down with tenants and have fairly detailed discussions with them in terms of what this means, what's achievable and what's feasible, what that means in terms of any rent increase. So yeah, it's an ongoing, it starts at the beginning of the year in April, looking at the kind of the wider service delivery, and then we'll drill down with them in terms of what that means in terms of spend.
Can I ask a follow-up, please, Convener? So does that then mean, with further negotiation and talking and understanding, that the wish list reduces from the want from the tenants, or is it still a burden that the council is looking at providing to am I making sense?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that the wish list necessarily reduces. I think it would be the level of priority that is attributed to each of these. What I would also say is what the discussions that we have with tenants relate to the budget and the rent setting for next year. What we will also look at is priorities for the future. So it might be that we say, right, we've got a particular focus on one area. So for example, older people, we will do so much in terms of the rent for the coming year, but we can again enhance that through the rent setting process in future years as we go forward, if that makes sense.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. Just in relation to the 5-year nominal setting of 2.2% and some of the challenges with that, I would just like to ask 3 parts to my question, but they're all related. One, given that we have to have all, or certainly the vast majority of our housing stock at an EPC rating of B by 2032, so within the next 12 years, I would just like to understand some of the challenges that we face in projecting forward budgets and in relation to our housing, the revenue account as well, and doing that as a service. I'd also like to just ask on the benefits that tenants would get from having their housing at an EPC rating of B and their savings on their general budget. And the final part of the question is just, again, a lack of knowledge, trying to get some knowledge on the Scottish Housing Quality Standard. How much will that come into play in measuring how we're achieving the EPC ratings of B for the whole housing stock? Thank you.
Claire, is that something you'd help with?
Okay, I mean, certainly in terms of your first question, in terms of projecting forward and the rent setting strategy, we need to make sure that when we have the dialogue with tenants, that we will set rent levels that enable us to meet on any priorities that are coming out locally or nationally from the Scottish Government. So the SHQS, any energy efficiency or climate change, that has to be factored in. And as I say, and Stephen might be able to explain this in more detail, we factor this in, not just for the immediate next year, but for future years as well. In terms of the benefits of heating or housing, we have undertaken some analysis in terms of where we sit. It's a very sort of high-level analysis that we've undertaken. You'll probably be aware that the average Scottish household produces about 6 tonnes of carbon dioxide every year. Through the EPC ratings that we have undertaken probably quite a high-level analysis to establish where we sit in terms of our local authority housing stock. And the team have done, quite a good sort of high-level exercise and certainly would indicate that we sit well below that in terms of the production of carbon dioxide each year, probably sitting around in about 3 tonnes rather than the national average of 6. We have got more work to do on that. You are aware of the fact that, we've got climate change priorities ahead within housing. Housing's obviously one area that features very heavily in terms of the Council's overall approach to mitigating the impacts of climate change. And that is one area that we will be focusing very heavily on in our forthcoming local housing strategy. So that will be presented to committee later on this year.
Councillor McKeown.
A couple of questions. We have 7,636 properties in which the Housing Revenue Account is there to improve these houses and make sure they meet the Scottish housing quality standards. I know that we are currently again reassessing that, and that's coming back to us in August, but do we know how many of those properties don't meet the standards in which the occupiers themselves are in fuel poverty, or whether those households contain any children? Are we measuring that? Are we finding that out?
Claire, can you answer that? I know we're at March 2019, 96% were within. So.
Yeah, we do know which properties don't meet the SHQS, and that can be for a number of reasons. Certainly some of our sort of more rural off-grid properties, and some elected members will recall that at the time that we did our rent remodelling, we had added in within that a hard-to-heat deduction in terms of properties that are hard to heat. I don't know if June has got more detailed information that she's able to add to that.
It's actually in item 4.2 on page 77 of the report. States, based on the stock data as at 31st of March, the overall level was 96.74%, as we've said, and that compares favourably across Scotland. We do have lists of the number of properties that are currently considered as exemptions or reported as exemptions, and the number that are sitting in abeyance, where there's private owners. Exemptions tend to be, virtually all the exemptions relate to secure door entries, where it's not feasible or practical in terms of cost to go ahead and do these works. Abeyances tend to be where there's private owners that have prevented us from going ahead and doing the work. But we do have the exact numbers for those, and I can get them out to you.
The second part of what I said there was, in these properties, are the people who are living in those properties in fuel poverty, and do they have any children? Because to me that changes our priority going forward, to actually target people in fuel poverty and tackle people who have children in the household.
I think that the information that June is giving is that sort of a lot of the bits where the houses where we're below the standard isn't anything to do with sort of fuel or energy efficiency. It's to do with things like where we've got a standard for controlled door entry, but we would be able to break that information down, and where sort of it's out with that category, we might be able to then look at a more detailed analysis.
Yep.
My other question was, Perth and Kinross Council, we have one of the most affordable rents in Scotland, and this reflects to me a housing service that has good stock and is actually a well-run service. So how do we ensure that with the vulnerable tenants that we have, when we improve houses going forward to meet the climate change emergency, don't feel pressures on their budgets because of this affordability? Because improving these people's houses to improve their fuel economy, to reduce their household bills, is probably going to put up their rent. It might not put up their rent, we don't know, because we don't know how much the Scottish Government's going to give us. There's lots of things still up in the air. But how are we going to protect these people to ensure that they don't get a pressure on their budget, because they're the vulnerable end of our tenants, and keep the affordability for them?
I would say that, you know, we're in a good position, I think, so first of all, in terms of the overall delivery of housing services. We continue to maintain our rents at an affordable, low level, fair well nationally. We deliver high levels of service delivery, so it's balancing our performance. We've got a good balanced performance scorecard across the council, and we have high levels of tenant satisfaction. In terms of drilling down, in terms of any additional costs that might be borne, what I would say is, you know, as members are aware, we've undertaken already through the phasing of the capital programme over a good number of years, a significant amount of work already within our property's external wall installation, improving whole building insulation in terms of loft cavities, upgrading and efficient central heating systems, roof insulation, improving the U values of windows and doors. The list goes on, and I think what we can do is share that, I think, through either elected member briefing sessions or an elected member briefing notes. So we are already in a good position. As we go forward in terms of any of the future targets, that is something that we will phase in with tenants over the 5 or the 10-year plan, so that it won't be an immediate hit on their pockets in 1 year.
Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Convener. It's on page 74, it's the table at 2.10. It was mentioned earlier that was at the beginning of the consultation with the tenants. I note that it's 11% of the tenants respond. I was wondering how that compares with previous years, and I was wondering if the engagement rises as you go through the process, as more tenants become engaged with it. And I was wondering, also during that tenant engagement, do we ask tenants about their energy bills and what percentage of their costs and energy bills are, and do we signpost them to agencies that can help them improve the situation, such as Heat or Scarf or something like that?
I certainly think the conference I attended was very well attended. It's the first one I've done. But Claire, would you like to follow through on that?
Yes, certainly, as you'll see in terms of section 2.10 of the report, at the initial stage, that's the initial survey that goes out to tenants. That was the 11% return. If you look at section 2.18, I think when it actually goes down to the voting for the options, then we obviously do get higher levels of engagement. That's been a big focus for us, and the 16% return this year is an 18% increase on last year. I think we probably fare quite well nationally in that respect, but we do want to do more on that. This is a big decision that affects all of our tenants. So it's an area that we're looking at in terms of further improvements next year, in terms of, more tenant feedback. We do, feedback through a range of mechanisms, face-to-face. We send out information on Twitter. They've got the opportunity to complete forms, respond online and whatnot. So it's an area that we continue to focus on with our tenants. And yes, I think in terms of the overall answer, they become more engaged as we get to the end of the process, when they're appreciating that we've drilled down and where that will impact on them. In terms of energy bills and your question there, yes, we intend through the survey, so through the initial survey next year, is to ask more information in relation to the whole climate change agenda and energy bills with tenants at the start of the process next year. We also, as you'll see, are just about to embark on a local stock condition survey, and that again is an area that we will be asking tenants in more detail about in terms of energy bills, fuel poverty, child poverty. So there are a range of indicators that will really support us in terms of future service improvements going forward, and that will be fed into our local housing strategy. And yes, the HRA, along with General Fund, fully support and fund the work of Heat and Scarf, and we've undertaken quite a comprehensive series of training, awareness and engagement sessions with staff and indeed elected members to ensure that everybody are fully aware of the services and are indeed signposting to them.
Just to add on the back of that, Claire, if I remember rightly, at the conference, there were displays around the main area. I know that was the energy efficiency, but they were there advising tenants of various things, weren't they? Yeah. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. I've got a couple of questions. So the first was with regard to the methods of engagement with the tenants. And I was wondering if we had any analysis of what were the most effective channels of engagement with tenants, and if we don't, whether this was something that we could adapt the process in future to capture, because obviously if there's a significant growth in social media as a way of tenants engaging with the rent setting process, then it would be useful to put more effort into that. Similarly, if we see that some of the traditional ways of engaging are declining, then we might want to do something to compensate for that. And that's, notwithstanding that we, quadrupled the level of engagement last year and have continued to increase that, which is very positive. So I'll stop there with that question, and then if I could come back to the second part later.
Claire, would you answer that one, please?
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't broken down, so we've got the overall level of engagements. What we haven't actually done is that detailed analysis that you've described in terms of breaking it down. How many we receive, how many responses we receive through, say, the consultation hub, face-to-face, and online. And I certainly think that that is an area that we will look at more closely. We, for the first year this year, introduced use of the new consultation hub, and we think that that has supported the increase. What we want to do is do that kind of drill down analysis in the future so that we can then target responses through whichever are the most effective, I suppose, and preferred channels going forward.
Further question?
Yeah, the second part of the question was, and it's with regard to the options that are presented before the tenants, and I'm wondering whether there's a more inclusive role that this committee can play in terms of the options that are presented to tenants. Now, whether that would mean bringing the options to committee at an earlier stage in the year, or whether we might want to consider having bands of options. So, for example, you could put sort of 3.25% to 3.75% in front of tenants, 3.75 to 4.25, and so on. Because at the moment, although we're asked to fully consider and demonstrate that we fully considered tenants' views, it does seem to be that we have a choice of, or we have no choice other than to approve the option that's put in front of us. And I notice for the second year that tenants have picked the lowest rent rise option, which is perhaps understandable. But I think, given the comments that Councillor Water made in terms of climate change and the corporate priority of the council to tackle the climate change emergency, does that need to feed into the options are put before tenants at an earlier stage in developing those options? So it was really just to have some thought about that, and whether those sorts of things can be incorporated, whether we can develop those sorts of ideas through discussion at the Affordable Housing Member Officer Working Group, or what. But at the moment, it seems a bit like a straitjacket that's put that the councillors are in. And I appreciate that the Scottish Housing Regulator sets standards and mechanisms for how we set or go about the rent setting, but I'm just not sure that it's as flexible as it could be.
I certainly think that climate change will become a more major part of what we do, and it would be nice perhaps if we could be a bit more involved, but I'll ask Claire for her initial comments on that.
Yeah, I certainly think, we'd be happy to sort of, have a more detailed discussion through the Member Officer Working Group round and about the approach going forward. And again, obviously in consultation with our tenants about the approach. Certainly we have looked at with tenants, I think, the option of differential sort of bandings. And I think bearing in mind this information goes out to all tenants, and I think quite a discussion that we've had with the tenant working groups and at the conference events has been round and about the complexity of the information and then the ability of tenants to actually respond to that. So we do that sense check in terms of, how our communication goes out. What I would also add in terms of the lower rent, what we absolutely have a responsibility as a council and as a service to do is to ensure that the HRA business account is well balanced and meets on whatever the priorities are. And that is a discussion that we have with tenants. So we need to make sure that, you know, as a minimal, all of the priorities that are facing us both at a local and a national level will be met through the rents that we charge. And then from there we have that discussion with them. So it is that two-way discussion that we have with our tenants. But yeah, more than happy to sort of further these discussions in more detail at the Member Officer Working Group.
Convener, thanks very much for that. And I think that one of the points that I didn't make was that, you know, for 2 years running now, we're departing fairly substantially from the indicative rent strategy, you know, and have a concern that, you know, we don't really want, you know, rent rises seesawing up and down. I think a smoother path would be something good for the future. So,
point taken. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. Firstly, I want to thank once again Claire and the housing team for another comprehensive report. As usually it's very full of detail, but as usual also there's some detail that isn't quite there for me. My question's in relation to the affordability model referenced on page 73 and also referenced in more detail on page 82, item 8. Compared to local housing associations, Perth and Kinross Council rent is lower by 21 to 22%, which is commendable and very welcome. However, this is quite a gap, so I am concerned that there may be increasing inequalities in housing affordability generally across Perth and Kinross. So my questions are, is the overall trend in terms of rent differential between Perth and Kinross Council and housing associations growing or shrinking? And is the 21 to 22% differential consistent across all of the wards? I'm very pleased to see that 83% of Perth and Kinross Council tenants can afford housing based on their income alone. But is there any comparable data on the percentage of tenants in housing associations who can afford rent based on their income alone? And finally, while I appreciate that housing associations are independent organisations and free to set their own rents and not within the control of Perth and Kinross Council, but given that Perth and Kinross Council manages housing allocations for the majority, if not all, of the housing associations, are prospective tenants made aware of the rent differential when being made an offer of housing? And what, if anything, can Perth and Kinross Council do, working in partnership with local housing associations, to encourage harmonisation of rent levels across Perth and Kinross? Thank you.
Long-winded questions. Claire, would you like to help there?
Okay, I'll try and capture each of your questions, but you might have to keep me straight. I think in terms of, is the differential consistent across the wards? I don't think we've got the drilled down detail of that, but I would assume that the answer to that will be yes, because the housing association rents will be consistent across their wards. Do we have comparable data in terms of housing associations in terms of their measure of rent affordability? What I would say in response to that is all social landlords are being encouraged at a national level through the housing regulator to really focus, as you can see, on rent affordability. And the rent affordability modelling tool that we've developed is something that is now more widely being adopted across the sector, both within local authorities and indeed within housing associations. And certainly in terms of the poverty and the child poverty agenda, it's been something that we've been very focused on. And through, in response to your question about our role, I suppose, as the housing sort of enabler within the area, absolutely these will be discussions through the child poverty and indeed the local housing strategy agenda that we will be having with colleagues across the sector locally about the affordability and the impact in terms of child poverty. In response to your final question, are prospective tenants made aware of the rent levels? Yes, absolutely. At the point that we undertake housing options interviews at that first point of contact, we will look at the various housing options that are available to the individual household and the affordability of those is taken into account. So that will obviously, we'll look at our own, we'll look at private sector, and we will look at the other options across the RSL sector. I don't know if Michelle has got anything more that I've missed in terms of detail there that she may wish to add.
Not really, apart from to say that obviously we would be more than happy to arrange an elected member briefing session around the affordability model, because that came up at the briefing session we delivered on rent arrears. And we're very much looking year on year to enhance our approach to affordability and to be able to drill down into individual households and into individual areas, because we hold a wealth of information around our tenants which can help us identify potentially some of the issues around fuel poverty challenges, and increased costs for larger households. So it's an area we continue to look to improve on.
Could I just add, sort of Claire and I are committed as well to meeting with all the chief execs and the senior teams for all the housing associations, and that would be one of the things that we plan to discuss with them as well.
Comment.
Okay.
I think this is quite an important issue generally about Perth and Kinross and public housing across the whole spectrum, so perhaps something could be added in on the progress in those discussions for future reports, and what the comparison is in terms of affordability as that data is collected and developed. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? Councillor Gray.
Thank you. I'm considering the 7.1 where it's talking about the reserves, unexpected events and emergencies. Has there been any influence of Brexit on the demand for council housing, or the negative demand for council housing, or is there an anticipated movement of residents once Brexit is signed, sealed and delivered?
Claire, would you have any info on that? Probably not.
As yet, to date, there hasn't been. There's obviously been sort of a fair amount of analysis, but it's not something that we've experienced locally in terms of any impacts.
That meaning you don't consider there are any residents of significant number who are vulnerable to whatever regulation is put upon them because they don't happen to be, or they may be foreign nationals from Europe?
Certainly we've got an awareness in terms of our residents, and we engage very closely with them through the housing team and the locality housing teams and our housing support officers, and they're all being provided. They've got full levels of awareness that we're cascading across the teams and engaging with our tenants in terms of providing them with information. But certainly I'm looking across at Michelle and Elaine here. We're not aware of any particular issues that have been raised. Our staff have attended all of the, the normal sort of training and awareness sessions through our equalities team. They're engaging with our tenants on the ground at a frontline level and providing all support and information that's needed. So we're not aware of any particular issues that have been coming through.
Do we have any further comments from any members? Councillor McEwen.
Again, thank you for this report. I think that the report itself reflects how well our housing services run, and I think doing this and combined with the members' officers' briefing just made life easier for us in reading these papers and understanding the detail and not coming out with more awkward questions than we already have. We want everybody in Perth and Kinross to have a home that's warm, affordable, accessible and fits their needs. And we have a role to play in meeting the ambitions of people in Perth and Kinross to eradicate child poverty, homelessness, end fuel poverty and tackle the effects of climate change and promote inclusive growth. Our housing system is dynamic and resilient, but going forward we're going to have challenges to actually keep that going, especially with the climate emergency. To meet the challenges of this climate emergency, I think we need to explore reducing the carbon footprint of our tenants, of their houses, but in doing so reducing their household bills so that it remains affordable and it remains something that they want to engage with us. The heat and scarf projects are ideal projects. I've had the heat project out to my own home to give me advice as well, and I think it's something we need to encourage our tenants to be engaged with so that they can maximise the efficiencies within their own homes through learning and understanding what they can do themselves, and it's not just all about triple glazing and loft insulation and wall insulation. Universal credit, I think, has a major impact on our tenants and the affordability and the money that they have, and I think we might have more questions on that to come in the next paper. The local housing strategy and housing condition survey will be important papers coming in August, and I think that they will be poured over detail by this group to to ensure that going forward that the climate and the climate emergency is taken into account as we develop and improve our own housing stock and try and influence other housing providers in our area. Thank you.
Councillor Waters, a comment?
Yeah, just a very, very quick comment, but I think this highlights how much the housing team and as a service are putting our tenants first, and that is the creation of the occupational therapist post for our tenants and supporting them this way, and I think that has to be applauded and not overlooked, to the benefit that will bring to a lot of people within our housing stock, and I think well done on that. I think that's an excellent move.
Thank you. That's that. And I'll just, if I may, quickly sum up. This paper introduces the housing revenue account budget covering the next 5-year period, commencing with 2021 figures which show a proposed 31 million spend. As we know, this account is self-funding and includes the proposed rent increase for the next year of 3.5%, this figure being the preferred option chosen by the majority of tenants responding to the tenant rent survey. A total of 1,251 responses were received, some 16% of tenants, which is an increase of 18% on last year. All tenants have an opportunity to respond, and it's interesting to note that while the lowest rise of 3.5% took the majority vote, as we would expect perhaps, a number did support a higher increase of 4 or 4.5%. This rise is greater than last year, but it is important to note that the cost of delivery of services is rising, and we wish to continue the important investment in housing services that tenants want and expect. And even with this increase, our rent levels remain affordable, and being the 6th lowest in Scotland, compare favourably nationally. The paper also details the capital investment programme, which stands at £65 million over the next 5 years, which will also help maintain our level at the Scottish Housing Quality Standard. Currently, in March 2019, as we mentioned, 96.7%. Members, we have to recommend here several points. 11.5, do you want me to read them all through, or are we happy just to recommend as is written down here? Agreed? And may I just ask, there was mention of perhaps an elected member's briefing on the affordability model. Would we be interested in that at all? Yeah, and perhaps we could have that at some stage, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So we now move on to paper 8, which deals with rent arrears and universal credit. And I believe Michelle will introduce this one for us.
Thank you, Convener. Following an earlier report to committee in October, officers were asked to bring back an overview of the ongoing work being undertaken to tackle rent arrears and prevent and provide support to tenants. This report outlines what is very much a person-centred approach, which tries to balance the conflicting priorities of the business head and the social heart. In fact, members have just agreed the rent levels for next financial year, and with a business head, it is this rental income which funds 92% of the services we deliver to tenants. But with a social heart, there are many vulnerable households facing financial challenges, often not through their own choice and having to make difficult decisions on a daily basis. There's no one single issue which is causing rent arrears in its entirety, but rather it's a combination of individual, local and national difficulties. We continue to look for opportunities to enhance the wraparound support we provide to tenants, some of which are outlined within the report. This remains a daily focus for all our frontline housing officers, but to date it remains our biggest challenge.
Thank you very much, Convener. It was interesting for me to read the report. Thank you very much indeed. Whilst I understand the challenges that are there, I noticed with the Rent First and looking at Rent First, which is great, but are we working with our colleagues in education to actually look at taking that down an age bracket and seeing if there's anything that we can do to look at educating on a level of understanding with the children coming through who will come forward and will be still faced with various different problems, because it isn't just in the rental sector here that there is the problem with this need to balancing the budget and look at the financing, because there are many people in Perth and Kinross that consider themselves jams with that just about managing level. So it's not just a social issue, social housing issue. It does go across the board. So are we working with education?
I'll pass you over to Elaine, who can talk about that.
It's a very good question. Yes, we're actually in all the secondary schools within Perth and Kinross. We deliver an integrated schools programme, and that just doesn't cover housing issues. It's about budgeting, financial management and things like that. So yes, it's drilling down in terms of actually running a home, having a budget, looking at how you actually sustain a tenancy. So yes, we are doing that. So we do that in the schools. We also do it at youth settings as well. We link up with youth workers. So yes, we do that through our education and awareness raising programme.
Councillor Pova.
Thank you very much, Convener. Can I just take you to page 116, and under the heading of universal credit, it says the council can request housing costs to be made directly to us as the landlord, and I'm just wondering what percentage of tenants use that applies to.
We have at the present time about, of the just over 1,000 tenants where we've verified housing costs, we have 600 on alternative payment arrangements. That can either be through their own choice for the money to be paid directly, although the first payment will always go initially to the tenant, or it can be as a result of rent arrears. So where there's 8 weeks or more outstanding rent, we as the local authority can request an alternative payment arrangement.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Can I just ask a wee supplementary? Are there any particular issues to that? Is that working quite well?
No, in the vast majority of occasions where we go or we request an alternative payment arrangement, it works well. The only difficulty can be where the tenant has asked for that, and even if they've switched to fortnightly payments, we still only get the payment monthly for the housing costs, but no real difficulties around alternative payment arrangements.
That's lovely, thank you very much.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. When this was reported last year, during the discussion of that report, there was the so-what question. So it's really good to see the future development section of the report, which talks about the Think Yes locality team budget and flexible, tailored, or the opportunity for flexible and tailored and rapid responses to supporting people in arrears or with problems with UC. Similarly, the mobile working more effectively and efficiently to free up time to provide more support for people with complex cases is good, and the benchmarking or the introduction of an incentive scheme may have some merit. We touched on deductions there, and one of the points I raised at the previous meeting was third-party deductions, which were running at a level of £43, which for people on the breadline, I had concerns that was the impact that would have, and specifically asked if that was something that we would look at. So has there been any policy change in terms of looking at the affordability of the third-party deductions that we have been making, and you know what the level of those would be set at into the future?
Michelle?
In terms of third-party deductions, a third-party deduction would be absolutely a last resort for us as a local authority, and we would on every occasion try to enter into a refundable payment arrangement with tenants. The minimum amount we'll take or we'll ask for in relation to a normal payment arrangement is £3.70 a week. That's regardless of the level of debt, because what's important for us is not the how quickly the tenant will clear their arrears, but rather the affordability. In terms of third-party deductions, as I've said, that we would only ask for that if a tenant had refused to engage or had broken a payment arrangement. And as I said, we've got over 1,000 tenants who are on universal credit, and at this point in time, we've got 297 of them who are on third-party deductions. In terms of the level of third-party deduction, that's not something that we set. It's the DWP that determine the level of payment that we get, and it'll be anything between 10 to 20%. and overall they can take 40% deductions, but there is a plan to reduce that in recognition of some of the challenges it's caused.
Councillor Fine. Do we have any further questions? Councillor McKeown.
Thank you, Convener. When we discuss universal credit and we discuss rent arrears, we tend to focus on people going on to it because that's our experience at the moment, where people have this 5 to 6 week gap where they have no payment or no money unless they take money in advance, which they then have to pay back. But what are we measuring what impact actually the variability of the universal credit payment is having? Because universal credit is paid monthly and people on low incomes tend to be paid weekly. So when you have a 5 week month, like we just have had just now, then a universal credit records that as a patient getting paid, the tenant, force a habit after 26 years, the tenant is therefore gets a reduction in the universal credit payment. And I'm not aware of any 3 week months in the year. So that's just money that they lose. So they get an assessment based on their annual income, which then varies and they actually then don't get that amount. And so that's a variable that goes up and down. And in the briefing we mentioned how people in January tend to be a wee bit more in arrears, and we assume that's Christmas. I wonder now, is this 5 week month and actually your universal credit payment going down? You know, these some of the pressures that our tenants are having. That it's, and that's before you go down the rabbit hole of people on 16-hour contracts who are of minimum wage, who therefore don't then respond to some other benefits, and that changes it all. And you just end up with a very sore head and need to have a degree in DWP. But there seems to be, it's a lot more simple than just the initial gap in money. The variability of the whole system and the variability of money is putting pressure on our tenants on a month-by-month basis. And with this all being new, are we now going to try and record and take cognizance of that? Because we're labelling these tenants as debtors for years. If we're only taking £3.70 a month off them and they've missed a couple of months worth of rent, then it's going to be a while until a family home pays that debt back. And they have that black mark on their mind that whole time.
Michelle, would you like to comment on my expert?
In terms of variance of income, that happens regardless of how housing costs are being met, so it's not something that's just come along with universal credit. Somebody's income from in-work employment can change on a monthly basis. Specifically around the wait and the 5 week assessment, that's when, as members will recall, we discussed at the elected member briefing session that we moved to a more supportive approach in terms of making sure the claim's been fully committed and we don't take enforcement action, because we recognise it's not always possible in every case for an individual tenant to be able to continue to meet their housing costs. In terms of the variance in levels of incomes, that's something that we would negotiate with any tenant who was in arrears, and that can be reducing the payment arrangement for that month, or taking simple steps of saying, well, we understand why you can't meet those costs. We've also got the Sustaining Tenancies Fund as well, so your point around, £3.70 and the length of time, if a tenant's maintaining a repayment arrangement with us and they're on a low income, the Sustaining Tenancies Fund is an avenue our officers would always consider.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you once again for another comprehensive and clear report. And it's very welcome, in fact, to see the various approaches to supporting tenants who do fall into arrears and that they're very prompt and timely. However, most of the measures that are here seem to be reactive once arrears actually occur. And I'm wondering if tenants are aware of, or in fact use a facility that if they anticipate falling into arrears either through something short-term or something perhaps a bit more long-term, such as redundancy, are they aware that they can proactively come and approach the council to consider how they can either restructure or address their future rent so that they don't fall into arrears in the first place?
Michelle, there is a section on here about early intervention, but I'll ask Michelle to comment on that further.
Yeah, I mean, we always encourage engagement with tenants, and as the report outlines, you know, it starts at the initial housing options approach with colleagues in the specialist support team having that discussion. And yes, we do actively encourage them to come along. The Think Yes locality budget that we're proposing recognises the particular one-off challenges and pressures that households can face, which may put the payment of rent at risk, so such as replacement of white goods or utility costs. We regularly do it through social media channels as well. We actively encourage tenants to come and speak to us, but we recognise that often it can be at quite a late point in the stage where tenants approach because they're just embarrassed to come forward and ask for support financially.
Very quickly, if you please. Yeah.
Thought it was trying to silence me there. Thank you for that. I'm curious really about how many tenants actually do utilise that facility, and I do understand that some may be reluctant to do so for a variety of reasons. I'm also concerned about how we communicate with some of the most vulnerable tenants, particularly, and I've raised this subject again before, but how we communicate with tenants who perhaps have communication challenges, who may not be digitally enabled and can't access social media, who may have sensory impairments, who are often the most vulnerable. So I think in terms of the rent management, it would be useful to understand, you know, how we reach out to some of these other more vulnerable groups in our tenant population to ensure that they are aware of this facility available to them.
Yeah, I mean, we very much to look to offer a range of opportunities for tenants to seek support from us, because we recognise that not everybody is digitally included. So we can do that through face-to-face, telephone, letters. We can go out and speak and arrange multi-agency meetings. So for more complex cases, we've got our professionally qualified housing support officers out in all our localities. But we would very much take an approach that suits the individual, because that's what our procedures are. They're person-centred and person-focused, and recognise that not one situation fits all.
If I may, Councillor Bayer, perhaps the last question. I'm conscious of time, but so please go ahead.
Thank you, Kavina. It's a very quick question, actually. The Think Yes budget seems like a great idea because we're meeting people in the middle and helping them in quite a trying circumstance. I just wondered if officers know what the size of that budget is currently in pounds.
Michelle, you're doing well.
For the first year, it's £30,000, and we'll split that equally across the 4 localities.
Right, members, do we have any comments? I'll open up for comments now. I knew you'd be there, Councillor McEwen. It's like having Councillor Wilson in front of me.
I'll stay at the far end and make it harder for you. I think our housing team's doing an amazing job. This must be one of the hardest parts of our whole housing system, is helping people in this sort of very vulnerable and very sort of difficult part of their life. Nobody likes debt, no matter what your income is. And I think the approaches of engaging with people before there are tenants, as soon as there are tenants, and as they go through, and trying to be as proactive with them as we possibly can, is certainly the way forward. I think there are areas we will do better, and I think as a council we always reflect on these things and always try and achieve to do better and better. And I think that the housing team is a team that's demonstrated that in the past and going forward. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments, Tom? No? If I may, I'll just sum up. This paper, which deals with actions taken to manage arrears, was requested at the last committee meeting in October. In addition, there was also a request for an elected members briefing, which was subsequently held on the 20th of January. In addition to that, the Vice Convener and I have both had an opportunity of visiting 2 local housing offices, one at each time, and spoken with officers on the ground. While Universal Credit is not responsible for all arrears recorded, it has nonetheless made a considerable impact. And that said, in fairness, some arrears caused by UC are revolving. Arrears increase week on week, are then cleared on receipt of benefit, only to start again. Undoubtedly, there was a need to reform and modernise the benefit system, and UC in concept may be the correct route. However, the feedback we have received indicates that it is the mechanics of the system where most fault lies. Much of this is above our pay grade, of course, and we must deal with the fallout on our manor. But it is the most vulnerable and poorest members of the community that suffer, on top of all the other problems and issues they already bear. And that is not right. It's as simple as that. It's not the right way it should be. The paper details the various stages that housing officers work to: prevention, early intervention and support, and as a last resort, to formal proceedings for recovery and possession. Control of arrears is perhaps one of the most difficult of council operations and presents a dilemma of needing to collect rent in order to meet the plans of the housing revenue account, yet recognising and understanding the needs of those who are in need themselves. It is summed up perfectly in this paper in paragraph 1.9. Communication is essential, and if I may, perhaps I could ask our colleagues in the press to pick up on this, that I would ask tenants who are in arrears or think they may go into arrears to talk to our housing officers as soon as possible. They are not here to judge you, they're not here to criticise you, they are here to help in any way they can. And if I may, I'd like to add one final point, that, and I think Chris would agree with me on this, that when we had a visit to our housing officers in local areas, they are dealing with tenants in poverty, in dire need all the time. And I've heard from them that they are dealing with people who have, in some instances, given up hope and are looking to take one final fateful step. The emotional strain placed on our officers is intense. And while they have their coping mechanisms in each office, I think in Blairgowrie they have a Fat Friday when they go out and buy bacon rolls to each other and enjoy them. Nonetheless, the emotional strain on our officers is intense. And I'm sure you will join me in recognising and thanking them for the work they do in this particular area of council business. Members, can we therefore approve the paper as indicated? Thank you, members. Thank you. Now move on, if I may. Okay. So we're now moving on to paper 9 regarding common repairs policy. I think June McCall is going to introduce that for us. June, if you're happy. Caught you unawares.
This report introduces the revised Common Repairs Policy, revised with a focus group of tenant representatives, including some members of our Service Review and Evaluation or SURE team during the summer of 2019. The Common Repairs Policy is one of 3 policies that provide information to customers and staff about repair service delivery, including the Responsive Repairs Policy and the Rechargeable Repairs Policy, which is in your pack today. The policy relates to mixed tenure properties where the council still has a vested interest and to the payment of shared costs for common repairs, maintenance or upgrades. The revised policy aims to meet the requirements of the law and good practice. It explains the rights and responsibilities of the council and homeowners and provides clear information on how we manage and charge for common repairs in mixed tenure blocks.
Thank you, June. Any questions at all? Councillor Barrett.
Page 15 of the policy and page 155 of the pack refers to the financial arrangements and financial assistance for owners. There's a paragraph which makes reference to missing shares and the provision within the legislation for the council to furnish those. Previously, there has been problems with regard to the council providing missing shares or providing cover for missing shares because there was no budget allocated for that. I know in the subsequent paper, paper 11, there's reference to the scheme of assistance for private sector housing and assistance that's been provided in terms of missing shares through that. But is there an ongoing issue with regard to actually implementing the policy where there's a missing share, or do we now no longer have a budget issue with regard to that?
It's work that we continue to do, sort of where possible, sort of I can approve, sort of for a missing share. We do have a policy position coming either to the next Environment and Infrastructure Committee or the next Strategic Policy and Resources Committee. I have seen the draft of that. Unfortunately, can't remember which committee it will be going to, but that will tie up all of the loose ends for this to make sure that sort of both budget and our approach are approved by council.
Thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just a quick question on the mixed tenancy blocks and common, which seems to cover more common repairs, which assumes a more of a legal term or something. on how you do it. What happens if you have an emergency repair? So if somebody's in a 4-block of flats and it's mixed, and you know there's some damage done to the roof for whatever reason, and it's leaking in and potentially needs to get dealt with immediately, or it will damage everybody's properties. How is that dealt within this policy?
We do recognise if there's a potential structural damage or significant water ingress into a property, we will treat that as an emergency. The way that we do that is that we will have a third party, an impartial contractor, normally one of our term maintenance contractors, who will verify that they do agree that it is an emergency. We will then write out to all residents, we go ahead and do the work as an emergency, and we then recharge the cost of the equal shares of that work in retrospect once the work is done.
Is it, just supplementary, is it harder to collect the money off the potential homeowners that may be in the tenancy block doing it that way as opposed to just a common repair?
In our experience, we haven't identified that there's any difference between collecting it in that manner or by going through the normal tenement management scheme voting process. It's the same.
Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Convener. I noticed yesterday in the press the SIM maps got published, and therefore I went online and had a look at my own ward. And I actually noticed that there's a mixed tenure area that I know that the housing team has had problems getting repairs done within our ward. That is actually ranked within the 10% rating within the SIM map criteria. I obviously think this means that these housings and these tenants are a priority to us, and people who we should try and improve their lives. So it seems to be that the mixed tenure is creating a barrier for these, that is just, this just isn't acceptable. So what can we do going forward to try and target our resources as a council towards this 10% where we come across this problem? I agree that we can't sort these problems out for every tenant and every allocation, but surely those areas that fall within this 10% SIM rating, we should be doing that a little bit more.
I'm sure there's legal barriers here, but is it June? Could you answer, or Claire?
The process that we follow is obviously we follow the process for the tenement management scheme, as you know. Where other owners have prevented us, where we don't get the majority agreement and owners prevent us from going ahead with that work, we will revisit that every 6 months and rewrite out and re-implement a tenement management scheme each time. Where a property falls into significant disrepair, then we will then implement the emergency process without having the voting system in place as we've just described. That other than raising awareness and contacting people, trying to repeatedly to contact absent landlords, our tenant liaison officers going out and door knocking, that's really everything that we can do to keep repeatedly trying to get agreement to go ahead with work.
Councillor Barrett, I'm just going to comment myself at the point of saying that this problem with mixed tenure was foreseen decades ago. I used to work for a lender in the days when Right to Buy were coming through, and we would never ever get involved in lending on flats because of the problems you could foresee on these things. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, I agree with you, Convener. There's, you know, it's a customer-facing service, and there's sort of significant impacts to the council's reputation with regard to, you know, how it manages TMS, and also it's a priority for our tenants, as was identified in the rent setting paper. I'm a bit concerned about the management of the tenancy management system. As far as I'm aware, the system has been effectively stalled since last September due to staff vacancies and sort of previous assurances that we'd had that there was an oversight on the length of TMS and progress on TMS being smooth. Hasn't happened. So I'm seeking some sort of reassurance from the director that the issue of the staff vacancy and the monitoring of TMSs being implemented and progressed is going to be tightened up.
June?
We have had a slight delay in recruitment, which has, within the team that deal with the tenement management scheme, we had recruited into post, and then the person that was due to start contacted us the day before saying they wouldn't be starting after all. So we had to revisit the recruitment process. We now have a new member of staff starting on the 3rd of February. That has resulted in a slight delay. Whilst we do still have one member of staff working full-time on the TMS, we really need 2 members of staff doing that. So there has been a slight delay since the post became vacant. However, we have plans in place, and we've rerouted some other staff in to help out. So we're confident that we will have these all up to date by the end of the financial year.
The end of the financial year is 3 months away or 2 months away, so I would hope that we can maybe do something a wee bit sooner than that, Convener. So,
comment noted. Any comments or questions? Thank you. Are we happy to note the contents of the report and approve the amendments to the policy? Yep. Thank you. We now move on to new policy on rechargeable repairs policy, and again I'll ask June if she could introduce this.
Rechargeable repairs policy underpins the principles of the responsive repairs policy and aims to ensure a clear and consistent approach to recharging tenants for repairs they are responsible for. The revised policy aims to ensure the Council consistently meets the conditions of the Scottish Secure Tenancy Agreement and deters misuse or negligence of council property. In addition, it also aims to ensure that HRA does not subsidise repairs that tenants are responsible for and maintains an affordable repair service that provides value for money.
Open up for questions. Do we have any questions? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. Just on page 5 of the policy, page 179, under our papers on what is chargeable. On the first one, where a crime is committed and damage is caused to the property, what happens in a scenario where the tenant's actually committed a crime and they can produce an incident number and put it forward?
Could you repeat the page, Richard?
It was page 5 of the policy document, the very first paragraph on what's, and it's under the section what's chargeable. And then there's the one, there's a bit about where, you know, not chargeable if there's a crime or a police incident number and you produce it, you produce it. And it was just to say, well, you know, is there not a bit of a blurred line between if a crime's committed for, I assume this is intended at somebody who's a crime committed by somebody who's not the tenant, but it's still within the policy. It's a policy to say if you produce a crime incident number, then it's not rechargeable. That's my reading of the policy, but and it seems a bit.
Yeah, that would normally apply
caveat.
to someone that's been visiting a tenant, and if the tenant has reported this, we like to ensure that the tenant has actually reported the crime to the police, and therefore the police give them a crime incident number, and when that has occurred, that's when we will waive the recharge.
Yeah.
Obviously, if the tenant themselves has been involved in the incident and therefore has been charged, then we would recharge them.
Yeah, I just thought it wasn't quite clear in the wording. It just seemed all you needed is a crime report and then you wouldn't get charged.
We'll have another look at the wording of that. Thank you.
Sorry, Claire would like to come in on that, I think.
I think point 4, just before point 5, gives the detail in terms of deliberate damage by you, a visitor or a household member. And then the next one, point 5, gives where a crime has been committed and damage caused to the property. So as June's explained, that's the way way round that it works.
Thank you.
Do we have any further questions? Any comments? Are we happy to note the contents of the report and approve the amendments? Fine, thank you very much. That moves us on to paper 11, revised scheme of assistance for private sector housing. I think, Claire, you were going to introduce that one.
Yeah, under section 71. Oh, sorry. The Council is required to implement and publish a scheme of assistance. The scheme of assistance provides information for homeowners on the type of assistance that the Council can provide in relation to repairs, maintenance, improvement and adaptations for private housing. The scheme of assistance has been revised and updated to reflect changes in legislation and current priorities. It is a legal document and it has been simplified as far as possible for ease of reading, but without changing the legal context or requirements. And as members will see, the type of assistance available is wide-ranging, and overall the scheme does provide an extremely valuable role in improving the condition of properties within the private sector, but also in supporting and promoting independent living.
Thank you, Claire. Do we have any questions? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener, and once again, thank you for this report. My question really is around private tenants who may require adaptations for medical or health reasons and who are in a private tenancy, because the scheme of assistance at the start of the report seems to refer to private owners. So it's unclear to me what rights or what options are available to private tenants who may require adaptations to their rented home, particularly those with a long tenure in that home. But what happens if the landlord or the owner of the property is not agreeable to that? What options are available to them, and what are our responsibilities in relation to those citizens?
Yeah.
Certainly these would be discussions that we would have with health and social care colleagues, with our housing options team, and indeed the private landlord, in terms of where any adaptations are identified that are required for a private tenant. I mean, certainly if the property is adaptable, that obviously would be our first option, to keep the person within the home and make it suitable. If that weren't to be the case, then through our housing options route, and indeed in liaison with colleagues from the Health and Social Care Partnership, we would look at options for more suitable housing.
Vice Convener.
Yeah, I'm just being a bit picky. On page 4 of the policy, it says page 18 has the additional information on translation services. There's only 17 pages in the sheet, so it should be page 17.
Do we have any further questions or comments? Councillor Barrett.
Just a brief comment, Convener, and that is in section 540, 41 and 42, it does state that private landlords cannot unreasonably withhold permission for adaptations under the Act. So there would be some legal recourse for both the council and the tenant. So.
Okay, members, are we therefore happy to approve the revised scheme of assistance and approve, in section 2, approve delegated authority to the Executive Director to amend the scheme of assistance in relation to delivering care and services? And do we approve that the future reviews of the scheme of assistance will be in line with local housing strategy? Are we happy with those recommendations? Yep, agreed? Okay, fine. So, after a mammoth session, we come to the last paper, paper 12, regarding Home First or Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan. And this is just an update. I believe Elaine Ritchie will be introducing that for us.
Thank you, Convener. All Scottish local authorities were required to submit a rapid rehousing transition plan to the Scottish Government by 31st of December 2019. This report provides committee with an update on the feedback received from the Scottish Government following our submission, the current and ongoing funding arrangements for the plan, and the progress to date with the implementation of our rapid rehousing transition plan. The report highlights the excellent performance achieved by the Housing Service and the positive outcomes for homeless people that has been delivered through our Home First approach, which is supported and monitored through our rapid rehousing transition plan. Some notable performance and progress is the 18% reduction in homeless presentations and the reduced time homeless people spend in temporary accommodation. The report also outlines the next steps for Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan and how the housing service will continue to minimise the duration, impact, stigma and cost of homelessness on ensuring the best outcomes for homeless households. This report recommends that committee notes the feedback from the Scottish Government, the progress to date, and approve that the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan becomes part of the suite of strategic documents within our local housing strategy.
Thank you, Elaine. Do we have any questions? No? Not at all. Any comments at all? Councillor McEwan.
Yeah, the comment for this is very easy, given the Executive Director's initial briefing prior to the meeting starting, and that to have the biggest fall in homelessness, the biggest fall in temporary accommodation, and the fourth best amount of time in that temporary accommodation is just credit where credit's due. Good hard work, which I'm now sure your phone's ringing from other councils to look at your documents and try and copy what is best practice.
Councillor Illingworth.
Well, just basically to echo those thoughts and to say that this morning we've heard a long list of excellent reports, not precluding Councillor Hearn's blunder that he discovered. So apart from that one, excellent reports, and housing remains one of the brightest jewels in the PKC crown. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. I think wholeheartedly endorse the comments by the previous councillors and also the director. It's great that the service get the national recognition that they deserve. The success of the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan didn't come about by chance, but came about by, I think, excellent management commitment from the officers involved. And I think at this time last year, I also mentioned the strong moral compass of our housing and homelessness teams and the efforts that they put into making the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan a success, but also for the decade prior to that, the continued investment and efforts that we had done to basically cut the elephant into small chunks and make year-on-year improvements to temporary accommodation, to eliminate bed and breakfast accommodation and suitable accommodation orders, to improve the quality of our housing hostels and to improve numerous times our allocations policy so that we provided sufficient allocations to people made homeless, and also the collaboration and steadfast support that we had from the main RSL housing providers, Caledonia Housing, Hillcrest Housing, Perthshire Housing, as was before that, in order to be able to provide housing to people afflicted by homelessness. So it is a huge success story and one that looks set to continue. I'm only ever aggrieved that we didn't achieve the accolade of being recognised as a pathfinder authority in terms of tackling homelessness, when clearly we were streets, if not miles, ahead of all the other authorities in Scotland. So it is a remarkable success story, and I'm very pleased to see the report here. I only hope that the success isn't lost by mainstreaming the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan within the other documents, and that we continue to hear how that is progressing. It's not going to be easy for the future either. The question mark hangs heavily over the future of funding for affordable housing. If we're wanting to maintain this performance, then the level of subsidy for affordable housing in our area provided by the Scottish Government needs to be maintained, and also to address homelessness elsewhere in the country. Thank you.
Barrett. I can only echo the comments already made by members. The only thing I can add is that I was at a COSLA meeting at the end of last year when the Rapid Housing Transition Plans came up on the agenda.